Welcome to On the Right Side of History with Kansans for Life. Come with us as we connect the pro-life movement's past to present, uncover hidden or forgotten history, and its connections to the battle still raging today. Now, here's our host, Danielle Underwood.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm grateful to have Archbishop Joseph Naumann in the studio. Archbishop Naumann is the recipient of the Heroic Defender of Life Award given at KFL's Overland Park banquet this year. Archbishop has been a champion for the right to life throughout his ministry, which has spanned almost 5 decades. As a young priest, he began working on pro-life outreach in St. Louis in the early 80s. He became Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Kansas City and Kansas in 2005. And for almost 20 years since then, he's worked to expand the range of pro-life resources and support available for people of any stage in life, any background, and any faith tradition. From assistance for women facing unexpected pregnancies to end-of-life hospice care, he has overseen it all. In 2019, he became the first non-cardinal elected as chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Pro-Life Committee, where he created a new nationwide ministry called Walking with Moms in Need. Welcome, Archbishop.
Thank you. It's a joy to be with you and with your listeners and viewers.
We're very glad to have you. It's an honor to have you here. You are very well known among Catholics and really the broader pro-life community, locally, nationally. And as you're seen as one of the most consistently and courageously outspoken defenders of life in our country. I'm just wondering if you could just kind of tell us some about your formative experiences, what first helped you to become the pro-life person you are today. Is that something that was a one-time experience, or was that a series of events?
No, I think it's a series of events, and it's interesting the way the Lord works in our lives. But it goes back to when I was in utero, I think, because my father was murdered a week before Christmas when my mother was pregnant with me. She was about 3 months pregnant with me at the time. I have one older brother. And so that's kind of part of my family history. And I grew up in a single-parent family. This was a long, long time ago. I was born in 1949, so it was still the first half of the 20th century. And there was a different culture at that time. And my mother, she was a deep person of faith. I don't think she ever thought about abortion. But she was surrounded by a family of support as well, both in our church family, but also my biological family. My grandparents, we lived in a 2-family flat in South St. Louis that my mother put the down payment on with my father's insurance money. And my grandparents, they rented below us. And so we grew up in where my grandparents were an important part of my life as well. But she had this family support. And so I think part of that, when Roe v. Wade happened, I was still in the seminary in 1973. I was ordained a priest in 1975, and like many people, I was stunned by this, that our court had done this. But, I was pretty focused on getting ready to be a priest and in my formation there. But I'd say one of the big influences on me was Mother Teresa. And when Mother Teresa, she was so courageous in speaking out for life, but not just speaking about life, but saying, send me your babies. If you can't care for them, we will care for them. And, with all of her work for the poor, I think she was just such a powerful example of this consistent ethic of life, that life is precious, whether it's an unborn child or whether it's a poor person or it's the immigrant or, it's somebody that's incarcerated. We believe that each and every human life is sacred. And so, I became a parish priest in 1984. I watched the Democratic convention at that time, and they nominated for the vice president, first time a woman vice president, who was Catholic, but she immediately went on to say, well, that it was the beginning of kind of using the pro-choice rhetoric, that she was Catholic, and she had all of these exceptions, and it just really saddened me to see this Catholic woman abandon her faith for political purposes. And it was shortly after that, it was just a couple weeks after that, that the priest who was the pro-life director in St. Louis of the Pro-Life Apostolate contacted me and said that he was asking to step aside from that position, and the Archbishop wanted him to come up with 3 candidates to replace him. And I told him, I said, well, had been in 2 parishes at that point, and I said, I wasn't even the priest moderator for the parish pro-life committee. I said, I'm not sure I'm well equipped to do this. And he said, yeah, but I need 3 names, and you're probably not going to get chosen anyway. So I agreed, again, after watching the spectacle of the Democratic Convention that year, thinking, well, if there's anything I can do, I want to do it. And so I was appointed. I had always, the only thing I had really requested as a priest was to serve in the African American community. And there are a lot of reasons why I had kind of a desire and a passion. But my first 2 assignments weren't there, but I got a 3rd assignment, and it was to the African American community. I was still, and that time we had a lot more priests, and so I was still what we would call a parochial vicar or assistant pastor at that time. But I was going to this African American parish, and there was nothing about the pro-life apostolate, so I thought, well, the angel of death has passed over me. But before I went to the parish, I got a call from the Archbishop, and he said, I think Father Boisvin's talked to you about the possibility of this pro-life assignment. I said, yeah, and he said, well, I would like you to do that in addition to being the parish was Blessed Sacrament. So I said, sure, if I can help the church. And I told him too, I said, I don't feel like I have a huge background in this. I feel passionate about it. He said, you can learn. You can learn those things. Mm-hmm. And it really was a great blessing for me because it gave me the opportunity. It really kind of compelled me to make myself knowledgeable about the life issues. And I met, the beautiful thing about the pro-life movement is you're brought into association with some remarkable people, heroic people.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and so I began that work, and most of it's done by the laity, but I was to try to help guide and give them support and encouragement. And one of the first things we did there was we started what was called the Lifeline Coalition, which was a network of all of the crisis pregnancy centers. It also included the Catholic hospitals in St. Louis, where there were many, and Catholic charities, and a whole network of alternative programs. We also were, I think we were the 2nd or 3rd diocese to start Project Rachel, the post-abortion. So, for the church, it's our approach to this issue is multidimensional. So first, prayer has to be at the foundation of everything we do in the church. And so that's part of our pro-life apostolate. Secondly is education, that we need to educate people within the church, but also in the broader society as well. And we have to try to reach minds to change hearts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then third is the pastoral. So like the alternatives to abortion for women, unlike my mother, that maybe don't have a family that's surrounding them and don't have a church community, how can we wrap around them as a pro-life community and as the church the kind of support to help them to do what every woman, I think, wants to do, mm-hmm. and that is choose life. And also the post-abortion ministry is so important to help those that chose abortion and now deeply regret it. A lot of times they were under tremendous kind of pressure, and but to let them know that the Lord's there for them and that there's healing, and then finally is public policy, and that we need to advocate for public policies that are protective of life and of the unborn. And there's people that I continue, sometimes people will say, well, the church shouldn't be political. There's a separation between church and state. And it's true that the church in the United States made a decision at the very beginning, our first bishop, Archbishop Carroll, that he didn't think it was wise for the Catholic Church and the democratic society to try to tell people to vote for a particular candidate or a particular party, that we shouldn't tie the church's credibility to any party or any political candidate. But at the same time, we have to form the consciences of our people about what are the important moral issues and help them to sort through those and prioritize those as well.
Yes.
So it's, these people have this mistaken notion of what, first of all, what our founders meant by the separation of church and state. It's not in the Constitution. It was in a letter of Jefferson to a church group, but it was really a way of saying that the government shouldn't be involved in the church. It shouldn't be telling the church what to do. And this idea that we're supposed to be silent on public policy issues it's not true.
Yeah, and I would also say that we know that there are so many very loud voices out there in the culture they're not shy to use their voice and those who might oppose our positions are very loudly espousing those positions. So I think it is essential for people of faith to make sure that we are speaking truth to the culture.
Yeah.
And I think you make excellent points. I wanted to back up for just a second and ask you, so I'm very interested in the fact that I didn't realize it was the second Project Rachel in the country that you started when you were back in St. Louis, and that very first position, your entry into this pro-life movement. And I think we see so much. I've had recent conversations with several different women who tell me how much they were hurt by abortion. And I just wonder if you've had experiences or conversations with women that helped you really understand the depth of the harm that they'd suffered from making that decision at a point in their life when, as you said, maybe they felt like they didn't have another choice. They felt like that was they were pushed towards abortion as their supposed solution. And I'm just wondering if you think, there's still a very much a need for Project Rachel and other counterparts to that ministry.
Yeah, there's a huge need, and particularly now that abortion is so much in the public debate again, this raises the issue in the hearts of a lot of women and men who are also scarred by abortion. So I think there's a huge need for the post-abortion ministry. And yeah, when I became the pro-life director, part of that was I would go to parishes to preach about the life issues. And the very first parish I went to, I preached at all the masses. It was a suburban parish in St. Louis County. And this woman came up afterwards. It's always dangerous to guess women's ages, but I would say I think she was maybe in her early 30s and very professional-looking woman. And she came up and wanted to make an appointment with me. And I thought, oh boy, she probably was offended by something that I said. And so I met with her later that week, and she came to tell me, that in her early 20s she had had an abortion, and she deeply regretted it now, and she had never told anyone about this. She had never been able to discuss it with her family. And she told me, that sometimes when she'd be at family gatherings and her nieces and nephews. She had not married at this point, and her nieces and nephews who would have been around the same age as her child, she would have to leave the party, go into the bathroom and cry, and then try to recompose herself. And so she really was saying to me, it's so important what you're preaching, and it opened up for me how important for her to know that God had forgiven her, our Catholic faith is not about self-perfection. It's about being transformed by encountering the love and the mercy of God. And so I think that ministry is as crucial today as it was. It began in Milwaukee, and God rest her soul, Vicki Thorne, a lay person who was by profession a counselor. She had therapists come to her and say they had women that were post-abortive, and they said, we can only take them so far with therapy. But there's this block because they don't believe that God can forgive them. And so the original Project Rachel was a partnership between the church and priests and confessors with therapists to really help bring about healing, which, therapy can do some important things, but it's God that really heals.
That's a beautiful reminder for us. So you also started a nationwide outreach in 2019 called Walking with Moms in Need. And, really you, through your work as chairman of the USCCB Pro-Life Committee, you took that nationally. And I'm just wondering how that was before the overturn of Roe, and yet somehow you seem to have had some kind of foresight to know that that was going to be especially important in coming years. And I wondered if you could tell us about how that insight came to you, or that inspiration.
So I became the chair of the Pro-Life Committee, but I had served like 6 terms before that on the Pro-Life Committee. And part of it was because of my background as a priest, that I kept getting chosen by the chair to serve on the committee. But when I became a chair, I mentioned those kind of 4 pastoral pillars for the church's pro-life apostolate. And the first thing I did, I had the committee just reflect on each of those pillars and say, what are we doing well? What can we do better? And when we talked about the pastoral pillar, that's when the committee and the consultants, we have incredible lay consultants that help the bishops with this, but they really originated the idea we need to do something nationally. And we're thinking it is possible that Roe could be overturned soon. I mean, I think I never really thought I'd see it in my lifetime, but we knew that was a possibility. But we said, this is what we should be doing as a church. And if that does happen, it's going to be even more important. So it was an effort, first of all, Walking with Moms, that invites dioceses and parishes, first of all, to do an evaluation of what services are available to a woman that's in a difficult or crisis pregnancy. And all of our parishes, we don't see them becoming crisis pregnancy centers, but our parishes should be a place where anyone could go if they're in need or they know someone that's in need, and we should be able to connect them with all of the services that are available with the bigger pro-life network. And we also wanted us to look at what are the gaps, where aren't there the services that we need, and how do we fill those gaps? So, yeah, I'm glad that we were able to launch it. Unfortunately, COVID kind of messed it up like it did so many things, because it was launched right at that same time. It was also the 25th anniversary of Pope John Paul's encyclical letter, The Gospel of Life. So we thought this was a great way to commemorate that. But I'm really edified as I still hear as this is rolled out across the country, and how people's lives have been touched and assisted because of this effort.
Excellent. So let's talk about politicians for just a second, because I want to go back to your comment about Mother Teresa. One of the things that she did so well was speaking truth to power, and she was unafraid. And one of the reasons that we wanted to honor you this year with the award that we're giving you at our banquet is because that you are an unafraid. You're fearless when it comes to sharing truth. And just like Mother Teresa called President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton to account for their stand on abortion, there is a particular story I wanted you to recount for us where dealing with then Governor Kathleen Sebelius in Kansas. And I know that you had made particular outreach to her because I'll let you fill in the details. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so when I got here, she was the governor. She had been outspoken throughout her political career, really in support of abortion, and as governor had vetoed, pro-life legislation, and she would often say, I'm a Catholic, I'm pro-life, and then she would do something that would, strike down pro-life measures. And so, as a bishop, our first, a lot of times we get people will say, you ought to excommunicate this person. When I first became in the chancery in St. Louis, one of the priests there told me, he says, you have to realize when people call here, a lot of times they want somebody's head chopped off. And he said, you have to first tell them, well, that's not our charism, it's our business to chop people's head off. But so the initial thing was to have a conversation with her and to explain to her the seriousness of this. And so at that time, the Kansas bishops, we would always meet once a year with the legislative leaders and the governor, each of them separately, to talk about public policy issues. And so we met with the governor, and afterwards I asked her, I said, I'd like to meet with you individually to talk about your position on abortion, and I'm concerned about your spiritual welfare. And so she agreed to that, and we had several meetings. I remember one time I brought her a rosary that John Paul II had blessed, and she was grateful for that. But, we had, this was over a year, probably a year and a half, that we met several times. And she would have been happy to continue the dialogue, but there wasn't anything changing. She was continuing to do. And I said to her at one point, I said, Governor, someday you're going to be before God. You're going to have to explain this to him, why you supported the destruction of these children's lives. I mean, she received awards from Planned Parenthood and so I said, but I'm also going to be before God someday. And if you say to God, well, nobody ever told me about this, nobody told me how serious this was, then I'm not going to be very comfortable coming before God. So, that was, I said, you really shouldn't present yourself for the Eucharist until you rectify this, change this. And you need to publicly do this because you've publicly been an advocate for it. So she didn't agree with that, but as far as I knew, she wasn't going to communion. But then I got a call from one of our priests. I hadn't made this public, but one of our priests, the governor had been at a funeral at his parish and said, she came up for communion. This priest said, I really felt conflicted about giving her communion. And I said, well, you did, the communion line is not a place to argue about theology with people, but thank you for letting me know. And so after that, I told her, I said, Governor, I've asked you privately, I've tried not to embarrass you on this, but you presented yourself for the Eucharist, and so I have to tell people that I've requested that you not present yourself for communion. And of course, she didn't like that, and that that kind of ended the dialogue that we were in, but I felt, and I made public, this request of her.
And you did that through the op-ed that you wrote, or you did this in a different way?
Yeah, I did it through our diocesan paper, and then that was picked up by the secular media as well. And at least in Kansas, as far as I know, she hadn't gone to communion. Shortly after that, she got the cabinet position and she was in D.C. But yeah, I mean, I'm sincere about that. I think for her spiritual welfare, she needed to know that, that there's just no rationale for a Catholic to be advocating and supporting legalized abortion. We can do I think we need to do all sorts of things to support women. Public policy people can do that. But this is the defense of human life. And again, people will say, well, that the church shouldn't be involved with politics. But, would those people really say that they didn't want the church to speak out against segregation? And growing up in St. Louis, the Archbishop there desegregated the Catholic schools in 1946 before Brown versus the Board of Education.
Wow. And
he got a lot of pushback from people on that, and he threatened excommunication for the people that were opposing him on that. He never had to use it. They backed down. But there were bishops that had to excommunicate people. And, I think it was the right thing to do. And today, nobody would question that. They would say, well, yeah. But at the time, it was controversial. And so I think sometimes we have to do that. We have to use prudence as well, because, you never know. For a couple of years, I was in dialogue with Governor Sebelius. And so, people, they might judge their bishop, but they don't know what's going on behind the scenes sometimes, where there are these dialogues going on. But it's sometimes, the time for dialogue ends, and there has to be some kind of action for her soul, but also for all sorts of other people. I said, you're the highest profile Catholic in Kansas. And she said, well, I think you are. I said, well, in terms of secular public figures, you're the highest figure. And so you're teaching people that other Catholics, see, I'm the governor, I do these things, you can do them as well. And you're misleading people in terms of church teaching. And I particularly objected to the fact that she would say that she's Catholic. I said, now you're intruding on my responsibility.
Good point.
You're not the teacher of the faith, I am.
Right.
But when you say those things and you act in this way, then you're beginning to teach what Catholics believe. And that's really where the separation of church and state is supposed to be. The state is not supposed to be trying to form people in religion. It's the other way around.
Yes, such a great point. So I'm curious, as you look back on your experience in pro-life efforts, these decades now that you've been in this movement and you've held lots of different positions. You've worked on committees, you've led committees, you've led the archdiocese, you've established ministries, so many things you've done. I'm just wondering if you've had a standout moment or a couple standout moments that you're never going to forget.
Yeah, I mean, I'd go back to just saying I've met so many extraordinary people through the pro-life movement, and I feel really privileged to have had the opportunity to really dig into these issues and to talk with some of the brightest and the smartest people and the most faith-filled people about this. So, I think I would say it's the people that I've been brought into contact with. I mean, I love Chris Smith of New Jersey. He and I think we're about, maybe he's younger than I am, but the same age, but we came into the pro-life together. And, he is such a great, I think, example of what a Catholic, he stands for human rights in all sorts of ways, but He's fearless on this issue. And, the opportunity to work with people like when I was in Missouri, then Governor Ashcroft and Senator Ashcroft, and across faith lines, to work with, in St. Louis, we had an organization, Clergy for Life, so to work with a lot of clergy of other denominations to work arm in arm together. So a lot of those things, I think the Project Rachel ministry is probably the one that I'm most grateful that I had a role in starting in St. Louis and trying to carry that on here in Kansas City.
That's really neat. Okay, so last question for you. What keeps you in the fight when others get discouraged? We see exciting wins, but we also see some things that tend to discourage us. We see that our culture seems to be almost disintegrating in some areas, and we see a lot of cultural influences that seem to be very contrary to what we believe, what we hold dear. And, it takes stamina to be in this fight. And you're not always on the side of the popularity. The popular stars out there are not necessarily on our side. So that's obviously just one voice, or one set of voices. But I'm just wondering, what do you do to stay encouraged? What do you lean on?
Yeah. Well, that's why I think prayer has to be the foundation of everything that we do. And when you become a bishop, you have to develop a coat of arms if your family doesn't have one, and you get to choose a motto. And it's usually a phrase from Scripture, but the motto I chose was Vitae Victoria Erit in Latin, which is to life will be the victory, or life will be victorious, which is really from John Paul II's Gospel of Life, and it's a phrase that he used frequently. But and part of the reason I chose that is because my long association in the pro-life movement, and I think it has application there. But I hope my ministry is a ministry that brings hope and encouragement to others. And with Jesus, he doesn't promise easy. He doesn't say, come follow me and it'll be easy. But he does promise that he'll be with us. And I think that we really have to draw upon that if we're doing what he's asking us to do. We can't let the way the culture or other people may perceive it, or you have to get used to. You get called a lot of names by certain groups of people and written off by certain people, and certainly that's not what I'm intending to do. But we have to stand for the truth, and sometimes that's not going to be popular. But we know that the victory actually has been won, and we just we're in the Easter season now, and we celebrate that Jesus defeated death, he defeated sin, and we're privileged to be part of its unfolding at this particular time and place in history, and to be part of that. So, sometimes we see what we think are victories, and other times it looks like we're getting beat up. But I always love what one of the people I met in the pro-life movement was Jean Garden. And she was head of Lutherans for Life for many years. She wrote a book that was called Who Broke the Baby? And but she used to end a lot of her talks, and she would use the scriptural passages about David and Goliath. And she said, all the adult soldiers of Israel, they looked at Goliath and they said, he's so big, how can we possibly fight him? But she said, David looked at Goliath and said, he's so big, how can I miss? And but she was saying that we can't. Sometimes the forces against us seem overwhelming. They have money. It's $1 billion industry. There are a lot of the elite, as you mentioned, are on the side of abortion. The news media, we have to fight to get our message out, but the news media just echoes whatever the abortion people say, and they're just a trumpet for them. So it can seem like you're fighting Goliath sometimes, but there's good history for in the Bible for Goliath crumbling.
We know how that story ended.
Yeah.
I love it. That's great. Wonderful. Well, anything else that you would want to tell us before we close out this podcast? Just a message for the people of Kansas.
Yeah, I'm just thankful for Kansans for Life, and thanks for the important work that you do. You do things that as a church we can't do. But I hope a lot of our Catholics are involved with Kansans for Life and supportive of what you're doing. And, I just salute you and just say to all of our listeners, this is the most important human rights issue of our time. I think the ultimate battle at this time is really over life and the family. And so it's worth fighting for. And don't yield to discouragement, but persevere, and life will be victorious.
Life will be victorious. That's perfect. Well, thank you on behalf of Kansans for Life. Just thank you for coming in and joining us, sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us. It was interesting to hear some of the backstory that you shared. We loved having you here.
Thank you. Thanks. God bless.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who are listening today. You can help us spread the word about this podcast by sharing it with someone who would appreciate hearing perspectives about life issues they'll never hear through most of the media. A quick reminder, don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified of upcoming future episodes. We've got more great conversations coming your way. Stay connected with Kansans for Life by visiting kfl.org and signing up to receive our updates. And you can also follow us on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok at Kansans for Life. As we say goodbye, never forget, the pro-life movement is on the right side of history. Truth always wins in the end. We hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.